Tantor Audio presents The Ancestor's Tale, A Pilgrimage to the Dawn of Evolution, by Richard Dawkins, narrated by Richard Dawkins and Lalla Ward.
The Conceit of Hindsight.
History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Mark Twain. History repeats itself. That's one of the things that's wrong with history. Clarence Darrow.
History has been described as one damn thing after another. The remark can be seen as a warning against a pair of temptations, but, duly warned, I shall cautiously flirt with both. First, the historian is tempted to scour the past for patterns that repeat themselves, or at least, following Mark Twain, to seek reason and rhyme for everything. This appetite for pattern affronts those who insist that, as Mark Twain will also be found to have said, history is usually a random, messy affair, going nowhere and following no rules. The second connected temptation is the vanity of the present, of seeing the past as aimed at our own time, as though the characters in history's play had nothing better to do with their lives than foreshadow us. Under names that need not trouble us, these are live issues in human history, and they arise with greater force and no greater agreement on the longer time scale of evolution. Evolutionary history can be represented as one damn species after another. But many biologists will join me in finding this an impoverished view. Look at evolution that way, and you miss most of what matters. Evolution rhymes, patterns recur. And this doesn't just happen to be so, it is so for well-understood reasons, Darwinian reasons mostly, for biology, unlike human history or even physics, already has its grand unifying theory, accepted by all informed practitioners, though in varying versions and interpretations. In writing evolutionary history, I do not shrink from seeking patterns and principles, but I try to be careful about it. What of the second temptation, the conceit of hindsight, the idea that the past works to deliver our particular present? The late Stephen Jay Gould rightly pointed out that a dominant icon of evolution in popular mythology, a caricature almost as ubiquitous as lemmings jumping over cliffs, and that myth is false too, is a shambling file of simian ancestors rising progressively in the wake of the erect, striding, majestic figure of Homo sapiens sapiens, man as evolution's last word. And in this context, it always is man rather than woman. Man as what the whole enterprise is pointing towards, man as a magnet, drawing evolution from the past towards his eminence. There is a physicist's version which is less obviously vainglorious and which I should mention in passing. This is the anthropic notion that the very laws of physics themselves, or the fundamental constants of the universe, are a carefully tuned, put-up job, calculated to bring humanity eventually into existence. It is not necessarily founded on vanity. It doesn't have to mean that the universe was deliberately made in order that we should exist. It need mean only that we are here, and we could not be, in a universe that lacked the capability of producing us. As physicists have pointed out, it is no accident that we see stars in our sky, for stars are a necessary part of any universe capable of generating us. Again, this does not imply that stars exist in order to make us. It is just that without stars, there would be no atoms heavier than lithium in the periodic table, and a chemistry of only 3 elements is too impoverished to support life. Seeing is the kind of activity that can go on only in the kind of universe where what you see is stars. But there is a little more that needs to be said. Granted the trivial fact that our presence requires physical laws and constants capable of producing us, the existence of such potent ground rules may still seem tantalizingly improbable. Depending upon their assumptions, physicists may reckon that the set of possible universes vastly outnumbers that subset whose laws and constants allowed physics to mature via stars into chemistry and via planets into biology. To some, this means that the laws and constants must have been deliberately premeditated from the start, although it baffles me why anybody regards this as an explanation for anything, given that the problem so swiftly regresses to the larger one of explaining the existence of the equally fine-tuned and improbable premeditator. Other physicists are less confident that the laws and constants were free to vary in the first place. When I was little, it was not obvious to me why 5 times 8 had to give the same result as 8 times 5. I accepted it as one of those facts that grown-ups assert. Only later did I understand, perhaps through visualizing rectangles, why such pairs of multiplications are not free to vary independently of one another. We understand that the circumference and the diameter of a circle are not independent, otherwise we might feel tempted to postulate a plethora of possible universes, each with a different value of pi. Perhaps, argue some physicists such as the Nobel Prize-winning theorist Steven Weinberg, the fundamental constants of the universe, which at present we treat as independent of one another, will in some grand unified fullness of time be understood to have fewer degrees of freedom than we now imagine. Maybe there is only one way for a universe to be. That would undermine the appearance of anthropic coincidence.
Other physicists, including Sir Martin Rees, the present Astronomer Royal, accept that there is a real coincidence in need of explanation, and explain it by postulating many actual universes existing in parallel, mutually incommunicado, each with its own set of laws and constants. Obviously we, who find ourselves reflecting upon such things, must be in one of those universes, however rare, whose laws and constants are capable of evolving us. But that was a digression about the physicist's version of the conceit of hindsight. The biologist's version is easier to dismiss since Darwin, though harder before him, and it is our concern here. Biological evolution has no privileged line of descent and no designated end. Evolution has reached many millions of interim ends, the number of surviving species at the time of observation, and there is no reason other than vanity, human vanity as it happens, since we are doing the talking, to designate any one as more privileged or climactic than any other.
This doesn't mean, as I shall continue to argue, that there is a total dearth of reasons or rhymes in evolutionary history. I believe there are recurring patterns. I also believe, though this is more controversial today than it once was, that there are senses in which evolution may be said to be directional, progressive, and even predictable. But progress is emphatically not the same thing as progress towards humanity, and we must live with a weak and unflattering sense of the predictable. The historian must beware of stringing together a narrative that seems, even to the smallest degree, to be homing in on a human climax. A book in my possession, in the main a good book, so I shall not name and shame it, provides an example. It is comparing Homo habilis, a human species probably ancestral to us, with its predecessors, the Australopithecines. What the book says is that Homo habilis was
considerably more evolved than the Australopithecines.
More evolved? What can this mean but that evolution is moving in some pre-specified direction? The book leaves us in no doubt of what the presumed direction is.
The first signs of a chin are apparent.
First encourages us to expect second and third signs towards a complete human chin.
The teeth start to resemble ours.
As if those teeth were the way they are, not because it suited the Haberline diet, but because they were embarking upon the road towards becoming our teeth. The passage ends with a telltale remark about a later species of extinct human, Homo erectus.
Although their faces are still different from ours, they have a much more human look in their eyes. They are like sculptures in the making, unfinished works.
In the making, unfinished? Only with the unwisdom of hindsight. In excuse of that book, it is probably true that were we to meet a Homo erectus face to face, it might well look to our eyes like an unfinished sculpture in the making. But that is only because we are looking with human hindsight. A living creature is always in the business of surviving in its own environment. It is never unfinished. Or in another sense, it is always unfinished. So, presumably, are we. The conceit of hindsight tempts us at other stages in our history. From our human point of view, the emergence of our remote fish ancestors from water to land was a momentous step, an evolutionary rite of passage. It was undertaken in the Devonian period by lobe-finned fish, a bit like modern lungfish. We look at fossils of the period with a pardonable yearning to gaze upon our forebears, and are seduced by a knowledge of what came later, drawn into seeing these Devonian fish as halfway towards becoming land animals, everything about them earnestly transitional, bound into an epic quest to invade the land and initiate the next big phase of evolution. That is not the way it was at the time. Those Devonian fish had a living to earn. They were not on a mission to evolve, not on a quest towards the distant future. An otherwise excellent book about vertebrate evolution contains the following sentence about fish which
ventured out of the water onto the land at the end of the Devonian period and jumped the gap, so to speak, from one vertebrate class to another to become the first amphibians.
The gap comes from hindsight. There was nothing resembling a gap at the time, and the classes that we now recognize were no more separate in those days than two species. As we shall see again, jumping gaps is not what evolution does. It makes no more sense, and no less, to aim our historical narrative towards Homo sapiens than towards any other modern species, Octopus vulgaris, say, or Panthera leo, or Sequoia sempervirens. A historically minded swift, understandably proud of flight as self-evidently the premier accomplishment of life, will regard swift kind, those spectacular flying machines with their swept-back wings who stay aloft for a year at a time and even copulate in free flight, as the acme of evolutionary progress. To build on a fancy of Steven Pinker, if elephants could write history, they might portray tapirs, elephant shrews, elephant seals, and proboscis monkeys as tentative beginners along the main trunk road of evolution, taking the first fumbling steps, but each, for some reason, never quite making it, so near yet so far. Elephant astronomers might wonder whether, on some other world, there exist alien life forms that have crossed the nasal Rubicon and taken the final leap to full proboscitude.
We are not swifts nor elephants, we are people. As we wander in imagination through some long-dead epoch, it is humanly natural to reserve a special warmth and curiosity for whichever otherwise ordinary species in that ancient landscape is our ancestor. It is an intriguingly unfamiliar thought that there is always one such species. It is hard to deny our human temptation to see this one species as on the main line of evolution, the others as supporting cast, walk-on parts, sidelined cameos. Without succumbing to that error, there is one way to indulge a legitimate human centrism while respecting historical propriety. That way is to do our history backwards, and it is the way of this book. Backward chronology in search of ancestors really can sensibly aim towards a single distant target. The distant target is the grand ancestor of all life, and we can't help converging upon it no matter where we start, elephant or eagle, swift or salmonella, Wellingtonia or woman. Backward chronology and forward chronology are each good for different purposes. Go backwards, and no matter where you start, you end up celebrating the unity of life. Go forwards, and you extol diversity. It works on small timescales as well as large. The forward chronology of the mammals, within their large but limited timescale, is a story of branching diversification, uncovering the richness of that group of hairy warmbloods. Backward chronology, taking any modern mammal as our starting point, will always converge upon the same unique archimammal, shadowy, insectivorous, nocturnal contemporary of the dinosaurs. This is a local convergence. A yet more local one converges on the most recent ancestor of all rodents, who lived somewhere around the time the dinosaurs went extinct. More local still is the backward convergence of all apes, including humans, on their shared ancestor, who lived about 18 million years ago. On a larger scale, there is a comparable convergence to be found if we work backwards from any vertebrate, an even larger convergence working backwards from any animal to the ancestor of all animals. The largest convergence...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?